Hi, Jasmine. Welcome to the Open Door Sisterhood podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I already feel a kinship with you. You were talking just now about your kids heading off to school on a cold day,
hmm
and I can relate to that. Tell us a little bit about your family, who you live with, who consumes your days.
Yeah, I have three little boys,
Okay.
um, 6, 4, and 18 months old. And my husband Philip and I live in Jackson, Mississippi, and we just some days it feels like we're just making it.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
gosh.
but every day it's a joy.
Oh, well, I think when kids are those ages, you are just making it. I mean,
hmm
really, my kids are a little bit older, but there are whole years of my life I don't remember because I
Yes,
think I was in survival mode.
yes.
And I have fond feelings. Don't want to say fond memories because I mean, sometimes I will a picture will spark something and I'll think, "Oh, I haven't thought about that in a while." But I do have fond feelings of that time, but I do know I was exhausted. Just
Yeah.
really exhausted. Are
Yes,
you tired?
absolutely. I am every
Yeah.
day, all the time. But um, I I've learned how to just go to bed. So like my husband will be like,
Good.
"Oh, let's watch one more episode. Let's watch it." I'm like, "I
Mhm.
gotta go to bed. I gotta go." Because
Mhm.
I know that in the morning I'm gonna be a zombie. So about 9 o'clock, I'm like, "All right, well, it's been real. Gotta start my 10-step skincare routine and get into bed."
Yeah, okay. Well, there's a lot right there. One, good job saying no to the next episode and going to bed. Two, good job having a 10-step routine.
It's
That
new. It's my self-care everyday thing where it's like I'm gonna floss every day and I'm
okay.
going to take care of my skin every day. Um, And so it's just something that I do. It's just like that's my time. That's my time in the bathroom to just I'm primping, which has never been my nature like up
Yeah.
until now. But I'm on the other side of 30 now. So I'm like, all right,
Okay.
time
Okay.
to get serious about this retinol.
Yeah, exactly. We did talk about that in February on our favorite things episode where we talk about our favorite things.
Oh, nice, nice.
And I did talk about the retinol night cream. But Jasmine, I feel like you kind of just segued into our series about making changes and deciding this is a new phase of life. I'm going to do some new changes. And a lot of our listeners are in a phase of life where things that are out of their control may be changing. And so we wanted to hone in on what it means to lead our lives, to talk about what we can change in the
Mhm.
context of maybe a lot that we can't. And you have a new book out on a really fun topic. I'm kidding, on shame, but I'm proud of you for tackling it because it is something that we need to talk about as women.
Mhm.
So, why don't you start by telling us how you define shame? What do you mean when you're saying that?
The feeling of badness, the feeling of wrongness, the feeling of wanting to hide. It's that emotional, visceral reaction that we have to embarrassment, to humiliation. Sometimes it's a side effect of guilt, but a lot of times what happens in our day to day life is just a side effect of feeling like we're not enough or that we haven't done what we ought to do.
Hmm. Yeah. And I would say probably that's a feeling most of our listeners can relate to. And would you say that's a feeling that is on the increase just culturally? These standards that we've created for ourselves that maybe didn't exist 10 years ago, 20 years ago because of social media?
I would say, I mean, I think that we're seeing it in different ways, you know,
Mhm.
as my normal job is as a history teacher and educator.
Okay.
And so I do a lot of work kind of like looking into the past and a lot of the standards that we're dealing with have been around for a really long time. And there are things that we have been imposing, particularly on women, for a really long time. But you're right. The difference is that now we can see them everywhere. Like it used to just be we're comparing ourselves to our neighbor or our friend at church or, somebody who's in our immediate community. And now we get to compare ourselves to somebody who's on the other side of the world.
Right. And we get to see our neighbor all the time, depending
hmm
on how often she posts, right?
hmm
And maybe what she posts, how she curates her life in that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, before we get into that, because I want to come back to that, why don't you share a little bit about your own experience with shame and what led you to dig into this as a topic as a history teacher? I mean,
Yeah.
that's an interesting combo right there.
Well, I will say, it wasn't my idea. So
Okay.
when I started, I have been blogging for forever. I started
Mm-hmm.
blogging back in 2007. And at that time I was 17 years old and was just
Wow.
writing about life. And that blog is archived, but that dang Wayback Machine, that, I mean, it's out there.
We can still find it if we
you
look.
you can still find it if you look. Please don't, but you could. And so I actually wrote a book when I was 19 years old. And it was, uh, people are often like, oh, so you're saying 19-year-olds shouldn't write books? And no, I'm not saying that. But I am saying that 19-year-olds probably shouldn't write books about how to prepare for marriage
Okay.
when they're not
When
married or
they're
anywhere
19.
close to being
Yeah.
married or like anything like that. And that's what I did. And so then I got married. And that was harder than I thought that it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I got married 5 years after I wrote the book. And almost immediately after I wrote it and published it, I had, that immediate feeling of regret that you never want to have after you publish a book. But I did. And I just remember kind of stepping away from writing for a really long time because I was like, oh my gosh, I led people astray. People read this book and they thought these things. And
Mm-hmm.
so I actually didn't write again for a really long time. Not a really long time, but in blogger years, a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
So about, let's see, I was 19 then. So yeah, when I was like 26, my husband started a blog for me again. And I really started just kind of thinking back through and reflecting on things that I had learned, ways that I had changed, things that I was grappling with. I started going to therapy. I started writing, based out of the growth that I was having in therapy. And my trajectory, it could have been a lot of things. I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor's kid. And so I'm really interested in things like biblical womanhood. I'm really interested in where standards come from when they don't come from the Bible. But what I ended up settling on was history. And that's just what I have loved writing about and what I've loved talking about. I went to B&H, my publisher, with this idea for a history book. And they were like, I don't know that we're a good fit for that book. But I think my editor, Ashley, was like, I think that you should write a book about shame. And I was like, that's interesting that you say that because I talk about shame all the time in therapy, like 24/7. I go to therapy. And every single appointment at that time in my life, she was like, that shame is she would talk about like my life as like and therapists are going to get this. It's the parts conversation, the different parts of you. And so she'd talk about the different parts of me all sitting around the table. And she'd be like, your shame part is loud and like takes control of the conversation and drives things at that table. And we have to figure out what part is like going to keep that in check. Where does Jesus come in? Where is he sitting at the table? Why isn't he at the head of the table? Why is shame at the head of the table? And so I told her, I was like, that's crazy that you mentioned that because I talk about shame all the time with my therapist. And she goes, it's in all of your writing. Like you've never written a blog post called Shame, How It Works. But every time you talk about unfair standards of biblical womanhood, growing up and growing out of certain standards and ideals, being gentle with yourself, being kind to yourself as you look back into the past. She's like, all of that is you grappling with shame and teaching people how to grapple with shame. And so without her, it never would have been a book that I would have written. But she did see something that the Holy Spirit was working on in me.
And it sounds like it resonated when she said that.
It definitely did.
Okay, so I'm liking this visual of shame being a part of you, sitting at the table. There are different parts of you. And why isn't Jesus at the head of the table and being the loudest voice? Well, because we're human, probably, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Like we all struggle with that, and it gets to identity. What would be some other parts of you that would be sitting at that table competing with shame?
Oh, well, I think for me, the biggest part that competes with shame is the nurturing part of me. So I am the oldest of 9 children.
Okay.
I have 7 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. I lived at home till I got married. So I was 24 when I moved out, and my siblings are anywhere from 14 years to 23 years younger than I am. So I just was always around babies and helping raise babies and taking care of babies. I got married. I started having babies of my own right away. And I just am a nurturer at heart. I just want to look after people. Like my friends are just like, we got it. Like you will fight her. It's fine. Calm down.
Mhm.
I'm just calling you and telling you that I had a bad day. You don't have to get in the car.
Mhm.
So that's a really big part of me that I often think of in relation to the shaming part because they're so diametrically opposed. So shame kind of like makes things die, really. It chokes them out at the roots. It makes them hide. It hides them from sunlight. And nurturing exposes things to sunlight and tries to bring things into growth and tries to bring things into fruition.
Mhm. So it sounds like you're naturally bent to nurturing other people, but you wanted to maybe take care of yourself a little bit. That
Absolutely.
kindness you said.
Hmm.
Okay. So you talk about different types of shame. Mom shaming. Uh, hello. I'm at the front of the line there. Marriage shaming, religious shaming, body shaming. I think we can
Hmm.
all find ourselves somewhere on that list. Um, how do we know when we're hearing a voice or a feeling that maybe is negative in an area of our life that it is shame? And then can you touch on some of those and how you have worked through those or have seen other women work through those?
That impulse of wanting to hide is a huge part. I think when we see
Mm.
shame for the first time in the Bible in the garden,
Mhm.
after Adam and Eve sin, the first thing they do is hide.
Mhm.
And we see that reflected over and over and over again in our responses to shame. A story that I like to tell because it's more lighthearted than the rest is when I was 14, I was part of a piano competition. There were 15 of us all playing piano on stage, all playing different, like we were playing a duet, but there were like 15 people playing the duet split
Wow.
down the middle. Yeah. And so it was crazy. It's fun. And I'm homeschooled. So it was like totally just that was my moment. That was my glory day
Mhm.
in the hot sun
Mhm.
was being on that stage and having my moment. And so we all the girls wore the same dress, all the guys wore tux, sitting in the front row, ready to go up. Crowd is packed. My mom comes down and goes, I need to talk to you in the bathroom right now. And I was like, right now? She's like, yes. I need you to get up and come to the bathroom with me right now. And so I get up and I go, and she's looking at me because she knows me and she knows my propensity towards embarrassment, my propensity towards humiliation. And so she's like, I want you to remain calm, but your dress is on backwards.
Okay.
I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm 14 years old. So
Uh-huh.
is there anything worse? Like in
Uh-huh.
that moment, then we're all wearing the same dress and mine is on backwards. And it's clearly on backwards because there's big buttons going down the back that are going down the front of my dress. And I'm in the front row. So now I have to turn my dress around and walk back inside with my dress on properly. It's a whole thing. And so it's
Yeah.
to me, that is like the best illustration of shame that's ever happened in my life because at 14 everything is so big and every emotion is
Mhm.
so huge and everything is so utterly humiliating all of the time.
Mhm.
And I think, we feel that dress moment in different ways. Like when somebody walks into our house and it's not clean, or when somebody says that, their 3-year-old is reading and our 3-year-old is still walking into walls, or we
Mm.
have, I mean, anything like we see our friend who just had a baby and it's like, where's the weight? Why do you look like that? But I look completely different after I have a baby. All of these things have an ability, right? Not everybody's ashamed by them. Some people are just naturally like, hey, it's fine. But all of the things have an ability to bring up shame in us. Ways that I've learned to deal with that shame. The first way is really just to name it for what it is. I think so often because shame leads us to hide, we don't call it by name. So I think
Mm.
calling it by name is a huge first step.
Okay. Did I lose you?
I'm still here.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Everything kind of froze for a second and I was like, am I still on? Am I still okay?
Okay. No, keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. The second step would be to have really good boundaries with ourselves and with others, to know where we start and where other people begin. So for this one, I'll use an example of mom
Okay.
shame. My 4-year-old was just diagnosed with autism. We have known forever that he's autistic. we've just been waiting, watching, let's see
Mhm.
what it looks like. Let's see how this unfolds. And it was just an answer to so many prayers and so many questions. He's wonderful. He's brilliant. He is a 3-year-old who is reading, but not because I taught him, but because he has a magical brain that just
Mhm.
picks up things and soaks up things. Um, and I didn't talk a lot about the experience of getting him tested for autism online, right? Like I just was like, I came online when we had the official diagnosis and was like, hey, this is something that's going on in my life. This is something that we're figuring out. And I haven't really talked about him much online, right? I haven't talked
Mhm.
about maybe his idiosyncrasies or things that we struggle with or triumphs that we've had, because even though he's only 4, it's up to him when he decides to tell people what autism is like for him. But I have talked about myself. So I've talked about like, oh my gosh, like I'm filling out this paperwork for Medicaid and it is complicated.
Mhm.
I never knew. I never knew
Mhm.
that there were 28 pages to fill out if you wanted to apply for Medicaid. I never knew
Mhm.
that, there were all of these different therapies. I never knew that. And somebody comes to me and they said, you know what? As a person who has a disability, I don't like the fact that you were sharing about your son's autism story online.
Mhm. Mhm.
Here's options that I have.
Mhm.
I could number
In this
one,
moment, yeah.
right. I could number one, just because somebody who is part of a certain community tells me something, I could feel shame, hide, take everything down, delete my stories, run away, not deal with it. I could, excuse me, I don't know who you think you are. This is my son. Go off, right? I could
Mhm.
do that. I could, there's a wide variety of things, but what I chose to do is this is where I begin and my son ends.
Mm.
This is where my choices begin and your choices end. This is where, and so it's this conscious thought of just because shame is giving you an invitation doesn't mean that you have to accept it. Just because it's knocking on your door doesn't mean that you have to open it. And because of the work that I've done in
Mhm.
therapy and because of the work that I've done over the last few years, I was able to say, you know what, thank you so much for your input. I haven't really shared anything about my son, but I have shared how my son's diagnosis is impacting me,
Mhm.
because mothers are people too. And we have thoughts and feelings and expressions, and things can be hard on us without us sharing exactly what it looks like for our children. Me making a story about paperwork is not me making a story about my son.
Mhm.
But I totally understand that if you're triggered by a wide variety of accounts that do share a little bit more about their children and have their own reasons for doing such, when you saw my story, it made you think about those other accounts. I am not a lifestyle account. That is not what I was doing. And it was a wonderful example of this because immediately she came back and went, you know what? I think I was triggered.
Mhm.
I think that I do see a lot of things like that that really bothered me. And so I think that I reacted a little bit too quickly, and we were able to have a great conversation, but it could have escalated in 10,000 different ways if I would have allowed shame to take the wheel.
Mhm. Yeah. You're right. It could have gone in many different ways. And it's almost as if the option is, do we go towards God's goodness?
Mhm.
And what does that look like for me to respond in his goodness in this moment? Or we can let Satan kind of take over. And I don't typically talk in those terms, but it just feels like when we have those moments where our internal nature that is not of God takes over.
Mhm.
I mean, that gets us back to the garden right there.
Absolutely.
That we can
Absolutely.
say, I am going to listen to the voice of God's goodness, which I know is going to reflect the fruits of the Spirit. And if I'm not reflecting the fruits of the Spirit in my response, then I am letting something else dictate that. And maybe that is shame. Maybe it
Mhm.
is that whisper of, you did something wrong, and so you need to hide. And
Yeah.
I think so that gets to my next question, because we do things wrong, right? Like we do make
Mhm.
mistakes,
Mhm.
and we do want to respond in humility and grow in those mistakes. So we need that internal thermometer that says, oops, that was wrong. You
Right.
need to apologize. You need to make it right. Um, in God's kingdom, we're always trying to wrong the right or right the wrongs, right? And so how do we know when it's shame, and how do we know when it's something else that might be for our benefit, like conviction
Mhm.
or something that would point us toward reconciliation, where we need to admit with humility that we did something wrong?
Well, the first question is, did you do something wrong? Which
Mhm.
sounds like very elementary, but back to the example of that conversation, I had to look at myself and say, have I shared something about my son that I wouldn't share about one of my other sons who is neurotypical? Have I shared something about my son that crosses a boundary that I wouldn't cross with my other children? So there's like this internal checklist, right? When somebody gives us, and this is like in a conversation with another person, but when somebody gives us an opportunity to feel shame or to shrink back, have I been listening to disabled people and talking to them and thinking through these issues? Have I stopped and researched? Have I? And so there's all of this internal work that goes into figuring out, okay, I feel this weirdness.
Mhm.
Let's stop. Let's think about it. Let's examine it. Where is it coming from? Okay. Is it coming from God? Is it coming from him kind of telling me, "Hey, yeah, you have done something. Look here, right here. You feel shame because of this." Now the response is to run to him in repentance. Or is it because somebody else is perceiving me a certain way, or because I want to be perceived a certain way? Is it because, but even then, even when it's not sin, the answer is still to run to God for our sense of identity.
Mhm.
I am not going to parent any one of my children perfectly. I have so much to learn about parenting my son who just got diagnosed perfectly. I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail in ways that are actively making bad decisions. And I'm going to fail in ways that are passively not making the right decisions. Some of those might be sin. They might be driven by my selfishness. Some of them might just be driven by the fact that we're not in heaven yet. And I
Mhm.
don't have a perfect roadmap to my son's beautiful brain. Um, all of those are opportunities to run to the Father and ask him for help and ask him for guidance, whether I'm asking him for forgiveness or I'm asking him to remind me where my identity is. All
Mhm.
of it means running towards him.
Mhm. Okay. So that seems to be our solution, right? As women of faith, is that we go back to God and say, show me who I am, show me where I need to ask for your tender mercies and forgiveness.
Mhm.
How do you do that in your daily life? Like, what's a practical way that somebody would do that? Is it through journaling? Is it through prayer? Is it through talking with a friend?
It could be all of the above. I wish I were more of a journaler. I think that would be a wonderful way to process things. I am not a journaler. My husband works outside. I'm like looking at his office right now. He works above the garage, and
Okay.
I do be going out there and just being like, "Hey, hey, you busy?" Having a little bit of a moment, trying to discern what I'm feeling, want to talk. And sometimes he's like, I'm literally in the middle of a phone call. But sometimes he's, yeah, I can stop. I can stop for 5-10 minutes. Like, let's talk about it. Stopping and praying, absolutely. Praying with someone. I have friends who will I'll call and I'll know that they will pray with and for me. Um, Also, if it is coming in the form of another person, I think sometimes stopping and saying like, "Hey, I don't know if that was your intention, but I
Mm,
felt a lot of shame when you said that just then. And I'm trying to figure out like what to do with those feelings, but I just want to be honest with you that like that's what they caused to me." Again, my husband, again, we have that conversation all of the time. Where one of us will say something and the other of us will be like, "Oh, that felt shaming." And I don't know if you were shaming me or if something is going on in me that's causing me to feel shame. Let's talk about it. Um, yeah, it's this
mm,
constant kind of self-check, checking in with yourself and checking
mhm.
in with others.
So, okay, so that's an interesting option there, because you may be putting someone else on the defense, would you
Mhm.
say, if you come to them, and at the same time, you are trying to be honest about, this is what I'm feeling and I'm working through this feeling. it seems like you would really need to have a trusted, intimate relationship to be able to go to somebody and work through that together. Is that true? Or tell me about your
I
experiences
mean,
with
it
that.
depends. I live my life online sometimes. I teach a lot
Mm,
online. I don't have a lifestyle page, right? So I'm not posting constantly pictures of myself, my children, all the above. Um, Gosh, that would be so hard because even the little glimpses that I get a lot of feedback. So I can't imagine. I'm forever prayerful for my friends who are more in the influencing space and posting more personal things because people have opinions and they just want to
uh-huh,
post. They just want to give them. And so I've had people come in my inbox before. I'll never forget. I was 24. Yeah.
uh-huh.
And I was wearing a dress that I thought was really pretty. And somebody commented and they were like, somebody sent me a message and was like, hey, my daughter loves your book. She's a teenager and that dress is showing a lot of cleavage. She follows you. So what if she saw the cleavage and thought that it was okay to dress like that?
Okay. Okay. This
And
is a great example. I want to hear what you had to say.
and I was just like, well, is your daughter, I don't think I was 24. I think I had a baby by then. So I must have been like 27, 28 years old.
Mhm,
And I was like, well, why would your 14-year-old daughter think that she could dress like a 28-year-old person? And she was like, well, I just want you to be an example for her. And I did. I
mhm,
said, you know, it's your job is to be an example for your daughter and place things in front of her. I cannot be mindful for my children and your children, my decisions and your decisions. And what you're doing is actually really shaming. I did say that because I
mhm,
feel like sometimes people need to know that that's the kind of language that they are giving. And that's the kind of language that they're saying. You are using shaming language. You are not a part of my community. You're not a part of my church family. You're not a part of the people who are holding me accountable in the faith every single day. And so you having an opinion on what I'm wearing is fine. I have opinions all the time. But you sharing it with me in this way is inappropriate and shaming. Now, did we work through that? No, we didn't work through that. That's not
mhm,
a person that's in my community. That's not a person who I know well enough to work through things with. But sometimes it is valuable to call a thing, especially if for me, my growing up, I'm a pastor's kid. My dad is pretty popular in some circles. His
mhm,
followers, I am 33 years old. His followers will still come in my inbox and tell me that I am disappointing their expectations of who I'm supposed to be based on my dad's teaching.
mhm,
I can't live like that. You know
mhm,
what I'm saying? Like that's not something that I can carry. Um and so I take it to the cross.
mhm,
And I also say, hey, this is an inappropriate expectation. Just in
mhm,
case you were thinking of doing this to somebody else, don't do it.
mhm,
Don't do it. And who knows, that might be helpful to the next person.
mhm. I think that's a really good way that you phrased it. This is I can't carry this. I can't carry your expectations or even your opinions, your um yeah, I think that's a really helpful thing to say, is it appropriate to ask yourself, is it appropriate for me to carry this? Why
Mhm.
would it be appropriate? Why would it be inappropriate? And often it's either because it's not mine to carry. Like
Right.
it's
Right.
just not mine, or this is an unfair expectation that somebody else is putting on me. I mean,
Mhm.
it may be easier, I don't know. It may be easier for some of us to um, dismiss the unfair expectations of strangers, but when it's people close in our circles, maybe our spouse or our kids, to then have those conversations. And I think that's where intimacy and trust can help those conversations go well.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but there is something about being honest with ourselves too. And
Absolutely.
as women, I think we're just, I'll speak for myself. I have to work at saying this is not a fair expectation. That's because I want to please the people around me. And so I let those voices that they may or may not be intentionally um, putting out there. Like I can interpret people's what I think are their expectations in a way that's
Mhm.
totally
Mhm.
twisted through my own
Mhm.
lens, right? And then And then I'm feeling all this shame, and they're like, I don't care if you did that or not. I didn't care.
Yeah.
But I, in my mind, thought the perfect mom will do this, or if I was a good mom, I would do this. And okay, so we're seeing that my area of self-shaming has to do with parenting a lot of the time.
Oh, parenting is such a shaming space.
Mhm.
I, are you gonna have a natural birth, which like birth is natural, regardless of
Yeah.
how you know what I mean? It's natural. It's a natural process. We've been doing it since the beginning of time. Are you going to like the first you have your baby and then the doctor is like, all right, we're gonna do some eye ointment and a heel prick and all right there. Like
Mhm.
there's an opportunity for shame. Are we going to do it? Are we not going to do it? If we don't do it, we get a ton of questions from the doctor. If we do it, then the crunchy moms are going to be after us. Are we going to do the vaccines? Are we going to give them baby-led weaning? Are we going to do, there's so much opportunity for shame and motherhood. And, for my babies, they were a little bit later on milestones. And so that was shameful for me. Yeah. And then having a son who's on the spectrum now, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's all these opportunities for me to drop the ball and for people to be watching.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you think that there's an element within the church that makes women feel or experience shame in a different way than, say, the general population?
I think so, because I think that one of the biggest um, weapons in the enemy's arsenal is to be an accuser of the brethren. And
Mm.
so that's something that Satan does. That's something that the Bible tells us that he does, and um, that he takes part in constantly. This, did God really say?
Mhm.
One of the things that I love in Pilgrim's Progress, my favorite part of Pilgrim's Progress is when Apollyon comes to Christian and tells him about all of the bad things that he's done, and Christian has such an opportunity to like feel shame and hide and turn back from the celestial city, and he's like, no, all of that is true and more. Like there's some things that you didn't even see. But basically Jesus has got me covered, and I'm still on my way. I'm still on my journey. That is an opportunity that we have almost every day. And I feel like a lot of times when we talk about shame and we talk about how crippling it can be, we're thinking about huge things, right? Sins that have been done against us, sins that we have committed ourselves. Um, but oftentimes it is those little like trickling things that debilitate us when they like pile on top of each other.
Mhm. So are there some ways, some things that you suggest that women do when they start to feel those trickles?
Yeah. First to name them,
Mhm.
to pray about them, to find somebody trusted to talk to, and also to protect our space and to protect our sense of community. There are people who really do shame and who really do find, I won't say pleasure because that sounds terrible, but who find one of the ways that we often deal with shame is to cast it onto other people.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so there are people who don't have a healthy relationship with the shame in their own lives. And so it spills out onto us. Sometimes we're in a place to deal with people like that. And sometimes we're not in a place to deal with like that. We have to love them from a distance and pray for them. For me right now in my life, I'm in a very tender spot about my children. And so people who are going to cause me to feel shame about motherhood, I'm like,
Mhm. Mhm.
I can't do that right now. And the automatic question is, okay, well then how do you have any sense of, how do people hold you accountable if every time somebody makes you feel shame, you cut them off out of your life? And my answer to that would be, have your accountability partners and have your accountability people. Have the people in your circle, have the people in, I go to church. I have a church community, and they get to take me aside and say, hey, I don't know. I don't know if you're making the right decision here. They get to take me
Mhm.
aside and say, hey, I wouldn't say this unless I was really concerned, but
Mhm.
those are the people who get to do that. But if everybody got to do that all the time, that sounds so exhausting.
Yeah, don't go on Twitter because I
It
feel like
sounds so
that's
exhausting. It really does. And so
yeah.
having those people, those safe people, and then also, ultimately having, there's circles, right? There's a circle of people who can talk to me about this, and then
Mhm.
there's a smaller circle inside of that, and then there's a smaller circle inside of that, and there's a smaller circle inside of that. And I think that the Bible speaks to community, and it speaks to accountability. And Jesus also exemplifies having a circle. There weren't just 12 disciples. There were tons more than 12, but there were 12 who he walked with
Mhm.
daily and who he did life with daily. And so I think having those people, having those friends, where I have a friend that I'm thinking of right now, where if she calls me to the mat about something, my automatic reaction is going to be like, okay, let me examine myself, because
Mhm.
she's my friend. She has my back. She loves me so much. So I know that if she's telling me that I have erred, if she's telling me that I've stepped outside, then we're going to take that a lot more seriously.
And she's a healthy person in her own right, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Like,
And she
she's
wants
not
what's
gonna twist things.
right. She wants what's best for me. Like
Mhm.
she wants me to succeed. My success in life is not a threat to her success. You know, she walks into my house and it's clean and her house is dirty. She's like, "Girl, look at you. Good
Mhm.
job." Right?
Mhm.
And like same for me with her. I think so often as women we have friendships that are actually covert competitions, and
Mhm.
that's just a breeding ground for shame.
Mhm. Yeah, we don't have time for that.
We
We
don't.
just don't have time for that.
Mm-mm.
That's why, we talk at the sisterhood about all of the things we do, because we are about healthy relationships where we're supporting each other and not competing. Okay, as we close up our conversation, do you have maybe 3 favorite resources that you send people toward if they are wanting to learn more or grow in this area?
The Soul of Shame by Kurt Thompson
Mhm.
changed my life when I read it. Talks about how shame actually like rewires our brain when we just let those pathways just grow and grow and grow. Changes that heal. So everybody knows about the Boundaries book,
Mhm.
but Changes that Heal is just by Henry Cloud. Now I have recommended it so much over the years, and people will say that it's a really good book to read at the beginning of your journey.
Mhm.
But maybe you will grow out of it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Like books
Yeah.
that really help you at one
Mhm.
part, but then you're like, okay, well, I see, like I've grown out of that particular part. So that's my one warning with Changes that Heal. But if you're at the very beginning of setting boundaries and having a healthy relationship with conviction, shame, guilt, it's a wonderful, wonderful resource. And then thirdly, I would just say everybody knows about Brene Brown.
Mhm.
Everybody knows about Brene Brown,
Mhm.
but she has a talk about women in particular in shame that was really helpful for me and made me feel not alone. I was like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, I'm not crazy. Like
Mhm.
this is something that a lot of us experience.
Mhm. And of course, you have a new book out. Can you tell us about your newest book?
Yes. Never Cast Out, how the gospel puts an end to the story of shame. I'm the worst at recommending my own stuff. I'm like, all these other things are wonderful. But it's just my personal story with grappling with shame and just seeing that the gospel truly is the antidote to shame.
Mhm. Yeah, because we don't have to hide.
We
God
don't.
has done the work for us,
Hmm.
and uh, we can celebrate as we're heading into Easter. We can celebrate that He has won on our behalf. Okay, is there one phrase you can leave listeners with about leading their lives and not allowing shame to have the last word?
Hmm. Jesus is the most important person at the table. Make
Mm,
sure that that's the loudest voice at the table.
well, I think that's a great way to end. Thank you, Jasmine, so much, and we'll encourage people to find your book. We'll link to it in the show notes, and thanks so much.
Thank you for having
Thanks.
me.
Bye.